Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack one of the most unbelievable economic collapses in modern history. We're asking the question, how did a country sitting on the largest oil reserves on the entire planet manage to lose it all?
Now, to really get our heads around this, we're not going to start at the beginning. Instead, let's jump forward to a hypothetical endgame, a thought experiment, just to frame how incredibly high the stakes became.
Just imagine this for a second. A world where years of sanctions and diplomacy just end. A lightning-fast raid in the middle of Caracas changes everything, overnight. Now, to be clear, this hasn't happened, but it's a stark way to visualize the potential endpoint of a nation's complete collapse.
Okay, so that wild scenario, it's the final, brutal chapter of a very real, very tragic story. So let's hit rewind and try to answer the trillion-dollar question. How on earth did a country with more oil than Saudi Arabia fall this far, this fast?
Right, so first things first. This collapse wasn't an act of God, and it wasn't just some bad luck. No, this collapse was built, piece by painful piece, by specific people making a series of absolutely disastrous decisions.
And it all really starts with the main architect, Hugo Chavez. You see, when oil prices were sky high, he was sitting on a $1 trillion windfall. $1 trillion. But did he save it, invest it? No. He spent it all on social programs, took over thousands of private businesses, and locked down the currency. This basically made the entire country hooked on one thing, and one thing only, that volatile oil money.
And the engine for that whole operation, it was the state-owned oil company, PDVSA. I mean, it was everything. It brought in nearly all of the country's money from exports. But here's the thing about a complex engine. It's totally useless if you don't have people who actually know how to run it.
Which leads us to this number, 18,000. What is that? Well, that's the number of skilled engineers, technicians, and managers, the people who knew what they were doing, who were fired from PDVSA by Chavez's oil czar, a guy named Rafael Ramirez, after a strike back in 2002. Look, Ramirez didn't just hand out pink slips. He basically performed a lobotomy on the company. He ripped out its brain. He replaced all that technical know-how with political cronies. The money for basic maintenance, gone, siphoned off. And the incredibly complex machinery you need to get that heavy crude out of the ground, it just started to rust. And here's the kicker, the really crucial part. Production started to nosedive years before any major U.S. sanctions hit. This is probably the best way to think about the whole thing. You know the old fable of the ant and the grasshopper? It's a perfect fit. You've got countries like Norway. They were the ant. They saved their oil money in this massive fund that's now worth over $1 trillion. But Venezuela? Oh, they were the grasshopper. They partied all summer, spent every last dime, and even took out massive loans against money they hadn't even earned yet. So you've got the stage perfectly set for an absolute catastrophe, right? The country is totally hooked on oil. The company that gets the oil is falling apart, and there are zero savings in the bank. All it needed was one little push. And boy, did that push come. In 2014, the global price of oil didn't just drop, it fell off a cliff. We're talking from over $100 a barrel down to around 40. For a country that had built its entire national budget around high prices, this wasn't just bad news, it was a bankruptcy notice delivered overnight. And this is where it all goes from bad to unimaginably worse. This is the choice made by Chavez's hand-picked successor, Nicolas Maduro. So he's got no income, he's got massive debts. What does he do? Does he make tough cuts? Nope. Instead, he just tells the central bank to start the printing presses. Just print money to cover everything. It was, without a doubt, the beginning of the end. And the results of that decision? An annual inflation rate of, wait for it, 130,000%. I mean, that number is so big, it's just noise. Let me try to put it in perspective for you. Prices weren't doubling every month or even every week. They were doubling by the day. Think about that. Your money became worthless so fast that it basically stopped being money. People had to lug around backpacks stuffed with cash just to buy a little bit of food. It got so bad that the paper the bills were printed on was literally more valuable than the number printed on it. But this wasn't some abstract economic experiment we're talking about here. This was a full-blown humanitarian catastrophe. It had immediate, devastating, real-world consequences for millions of ordinary people. Because the government was controlling prices and had no dollars to buy anything from the outside world, businesses couldn't import goods, so grocery store shelves just
went empty. Hunger became a nationwide crisis, which led to this really grim joke people started telling about the Maduro diet.
And what do you do when there's no food and no hope? You do the only thing you can. You leave. That number you see, 7.9 million. That's the best estimate for how many Venezuelans have fled their own country. To put that in perspective, that's roughly a quarter of the entire population. Gone.
This became one of the biggest displacement crises on the entire planet. But it was different from others you might have seen on the news. Most people couldn't afford a plane ticket or even a bus ticket, so they just walked. Millions of them. They became known as Los Caminantes, the walkers. They walked out of their country, crossing the freezing Andes Mountains into Colombia and beyond. An entire nation of refugees, on foot.
So it all comes back to that first question, doesn't it? How can a country with so much wealth under its feet fail so spectacularly? Well, there's actually a name for it. It's a well-known economic theory called the resource curse.
And the idea behind it is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. It basically says that having all this free money just pouring out of the ground can act like a poison. It traps a country. It kills off every other part of the economy and completely corrupts the political system.
And in Venezuela's case, the curse hit like a perfect storm. First, you had Dutch disease. That's when all the oil money made it cheaper to just import food instead of growing it, so local farms died. Then, the government became what's called a rentier state. It didn't need your taxes. It had oil money, so it stopped being accountable to its people. Third, because they had zero savings, that 2014 price crash meant instant bankruptcy. And finally, all that easy, unaccountable money, well, it fueled corruption on a scale that's just almost impossible to wrap your head around.
And that leaves us right here, with one final, very unsettling thought. After all that pain, all that devastation, the oil is still there. 300 billion barrels of it just waiting under the ground. So the real question for Venezuela and for the rest of us is this. Was this whole tragedy a lesson learned? Or is it just a curse that's waiting to begin all over again?